A lot of you here. This is exciting. We read through all of your guys' intake. I don't know what the registrations, that's the word I'm looking for, right? And so there's a lot of different people here tonight. We got people that are here concerned to find out more about them for themselves, right? We got some providers here trying to learn some more about how to better serve their clients, right? We got some teachers here. Got some people just looking for help with loved ones. So super excited to have all you guys here. I'm going to try to touch on as many of the comments that you guys left, okay? But I also want to make sure you leave here with, some answers that you've been looking for, right? So make sure you ask some questions. Now, I'm going to share a ton of information with you, and I'll leave time at the end for the questions. So if it's like you need some clarification on something I said, certainly just raise your hand, ask the question. That's completely fine, okay? If we get to the end and I still haven't answered your question, then make sure you ask, okay? Because there's probably somebody else in the room that feels exactly the same way, okay? Now, I'm going to record it too, which is really just so that if I have to email it to somebody, that's fine, but you guys aren't actually going to be on the camera. It's just my cell phone, okay? But what we want to look at tonight is, really we're going to talk about the most common 4 mental health challenges, but we really want to learn as much as we can about what's going on in the background, like what's the actual cause. Because as many of you wrote in your intake or on your registration, you've gotten to a certain point with your current plan or your current strategy, but there's still something left to be desired, right? And so we're going to try to talk about what that might be, try to uncover some things for you, and really help you guys find some answers tonight, okay? Does that sound great? Yes? All right. So this is me. You guys probably know from the communication that I'm a chiropractor here in the Quad Cities. If you did a whole bunch of homework and Googled me and said, who the heck is this guy that I'm going to be listening to? You probably saw that our office is not far from here, and we're known for seeing a lot of kids and families, and we focus on nervous system challenges like autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, anxiety, and all those things, okay? And over the years of doing other workshops, you maybe have seen our name pop up with workshops under these titles, which over 9 years, the name has changed a few times. The most recent time we did it, called the ABCs of Autism, ADHD, and Anxiety. We're going to do it again in December. It's going to have a little bit different name because we're kind of bringing in a little different information. But what we learned through the process of doing these workshops was that, hey, look, the parents a lot of times and the adults surrounding these kids a lot of times have very similar challenges. Now they come to these workshops looking for answers for their kiddos, and then they realize a lot of things about themselves, right, in their own day-to-day life. So we thought, hey, look, why don't we put together a workshop that actually is more targeted towards the adult. Now, the same principles apply to kids too, but a lot of the communication today is going to be to the adults, okay? So we've been doing this for a long time. The workshop itself is very well referenced, and there's a whole bunch of research behind it. If you guys are researchers and want to read a whole bunch of cool stuff about the brain, you can certainly take a picture of this slide, because this is a lot of great information that you could look up, okay? And if you didn't take a picture and later on you're like, hey, what were the names of those books? You can certainly reach out to us and we could send you this list, okay? We're going to talk about a few of them specifically tonight, but this is where most of the information has come from, okay? But the real goal here is, first we got to figure out what's actually going on. What's the background? What's happening, right? Then we're going to figure out why is it happening and why is it creating these mental health challenges that we're dealing with. And then last, we're going to say, all right, well, what do we do next, right? We came here for some answers. We came here for some information. So then we're going to put it all together. Sound like a good plan? Everybody good with that? Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about where we're at. First thing here is, this is a $300 billion per year economic burden in the United States, okay? $300 billion a year is spent on primarily the 4 that we had there listed: anxiety, depression, OCD, and PTSD, okay? Now, you'll see the stats up there, right? About half of us in our lifetime will be diagnosed with one. About 25% of us in the United States currently have a mental health diagnosis, right? And this one here, pretty crazy, it's the leading cause of disability between the ages of 15 and 44. So we got to figure out what the heck's going on, right? That's obviously why you guys are here. That's why we had, I mean, you look around, you can see how many people here. We had 130 people register for this workshop, right? I completely understand as we go through this process, it's really hard to talk about this stuff. It's really hard to show up for a workshop and be like, oh yeah, I want to learn more about this. Craziest thing is though, you want to be good at basketball? What do? You learn more about it, you hire a coach, you practice. Be better at golf, same thing. Better at dance, you learn more about the sport, you hire a coach, you go to a class. You want to be better at mental health. It's not something people are like, oh yeah, I want to be better at this. Let me talk to my friends about this, right? Because then we've got this stigma of, oh, you got a problem or you got something wrong with your brain, right? So it's harder to be excited about learning more information. It's harder to show up in this seat to be here to learn more about this. So I applaud you guys for being here. Super appreciate you spending this time with me. And as you can look around, as you see this stat here, it's certainly more prevalent in women than men. And women typically go get help for themselves more often too. So we're going to learn all about all the information here, but we also want to learn about the trends. Okay, so if we look at this is all the way back in 2013, right here, okay? At that time, mental health disorder was $201 billion as the most expensive, right? Health challenge. Now, number 2, which is one of the leading causes of death in the United States, was 50 billion with a B less that we spent in 2013 on that, which means it's a big challenge. Now, this is 9 years ago, right? And now we said that number went from 201 billion to now 300 billion, right? So if our current approaches and our current strategies to what we're doing to try to right the ship are working, that number shouldn't be getting bigger, should it? Not by 30% or 50%, right? So we'll walk through them here. The first one, the most common one, obviously, probably something that's not a surprise to a lot of people here, because when we look at like, hey, what are we coming to this for? When we ask you guys on the intake, on the registration, primarily it was anxiety. Now that affects 40 million adults, and it's about 18% of our population. Now, it's also the most common comorbidity, right? So if we also have depression, then you're at a 50% chance that you're also going to have anxiety, right? It also affects 1 in 8 kids. So like I said in the beginning, I help a whole bunch of kids and share information with families about why something's affecting their kids. So it's not something we can overlook here either. But super, super common there too. And then the rest of them, PTSD is about 7.7 million. And then we have OCD, which is 2 million. Which actually 2 million adults, 2.2 million adults, and 2.2 million children. So if we go off percentages, OCD actually is more common in children, even though they say here on this last slide, the average onset is 19. It's actually now more common, becoming more common in children, okay? So all of these trends are telling us that we're certainly heading in the wrong direction. And this isn't just a United States problem, right? If we look at this, in 2001, the World Health Organization predicted by 2020, that this would be the number 2 leading cause of disability in the world. And they nailed that. And then like I said before, if we're doing things correctly, if we really have a grasp on mental health challenges and mental health illness, then we should be able to interrupt this projection of 2030 of it being the number 1. But right now, that's not the reality, right? The reality is we're moving in the wrong direction. And at least 1 in 20 of, or at least 32 million of us have 1 of 20 chronic health conditions. Okay? Now, how many people in this, and I understand, like I said, I know it's hard to show up. I know it's even harder to interact, but you feel free. If you don't want to, don't. If you do, interact, that's fine. But how many people have heard when it comes to mental health challenges, disorders, illnesses, that it's a brain chemical problem? Right? That's what we say is the challenge. That's what we have, I mean, until recently, That's what we've looked at it as. There's a problem in how much serotonin and norepinephrine's in your brain. Okay? And we take something called an SSRI, which is really trying to help increase the levels of serotonin in the brain. Well, this guy here and his group of researchers said, wait, not so fast. This might not actually be true. And then we got another book that said the same thing. It says, wait, this isn't actually a serotonin problem. And then further research says, wait a second, we can't actually test serotonin levels until postmortem. So we don't actually know if any of this is working, but we can tell that if we have someone that has this illness or has these illnesses, is on an SSRI, and they unfortunately pass, then we can do a study. And what they're finding out with both animal and human studies is it's not actually increasing any level of serotonin. They still have imbalances and low levels. So the medication isn't actually helping. Okay? Now, that can be a problem, right? We have a problem. We have a anxiety, we just say any mental health challenge, and we've had a plan, and we've been on this path, and we've been talking about this for a long period of time, and then you have got some guy standing up here in the front of the room and says, hey, guess what? The research says whatever they told you wasn't actually working. You probably feel that, though. It's, according to a lot of you on your registration, that's why you're here, right? Now, I'm certainly not here to take anybody off of a medication or tell them medication doesn't work. It certainly does. I'm going to show you why it works to a certain extent. But that's not our role. Our role is to say, hey, what else is going on? What might we be able to do in addition to the other people that are already working on your team? Okay? So certainly, anytime you come to one of my workshops, I'm going to share information with you that may be a little uncomfortable, but it is never about, hey, what you are doing or what you previously did was wrong. That's never what it's about. It's about, hey, look, what decision you made before coming to this point has been based off the information you had, and it was the best decision for you and for your family and for whoever else that you came to learn about. But now moving forward, I'm going to try to give you more information that might help you to make an easier decision, or potentially not even a different decision, just help you make decisions moving forward that might be different based on new information. Okay? All right, so another thing we notice as we go through mental health conditions is that a lot of times they occur with other physical conditions, right? There's some pain syndromes in there, a lot of other health challenges. They occur at the same time. There's also a very big indicator or correlation to early life stress. So a lot of times there's a lot of stress early on in the life of people that have mental health conditions. So then we got to say, well, wait a second then. If we're looking at this and we know it's not a brain chemical problem because there's no research or very little research to even suggest that, and most of the postmortem studies actually refute that, then what if it is actually more of a symptom of another bigger problem or a different problem, right? And what if it's actually a whole systemic, a whole body problem, and it's not just a brain problem, right? A lot of times we're looking at the brain, we're saying, it's called a mental illness, so we're going to think, well, it's got to be mental, it's got to be the brain. But we're going to learn, we're going to talk about tonight, it might not just be coming from the brain. It might not be an actual solely brain challenge, okay? All right, so now we got a car. This is a mechanical system. We're going to talk about a few different systems here. First, what's a car need to work? Engine, what else? Gas. Yeah? Yep, battery. So you guys nailed it. It needs parts and it needs power, right? We got to have a whole bunch of parts of this car assembled, and we need some power. But then we also need something to tell the car what to do. So we need some information, right? Especially in today's cars, there's about 20 different computers in those things, probably even more. Taking the power and the parts, connecting them, and telling them what to do, right? If you got a computer, it's the same exact thing, okay? We got parts, we got power, we got information. So those are very mechanistic ways of looking at a system. Well, the human body isn't actually very different. What's our human body made up of? Parts?
80% water or brain, your lungs, your ribs, and also most of your body is also mainly fat other than muscles.
That's right. Exactly right. So we got parts. We got the brain you said in there. That's the power, right? We got some organs like our heart. That's some power. Same thing. Parts, power, And then we have information shared with us that as we interact with our environment that is going to make these parts and this power work together. Now, what's the difference between a living system like our human body and a car or a computer? Yes, sir.
There are a lot of different energy sources, but both has a cause.
Yeah? What about when they're injured? What if I cut my finger and I put a Band-Aid on it, then a week later I take the Band-Aid off and the cut's gone? Did the Band-Aid heal that? No. All right. I'm going to cut my car. I'm going to put a Band-Aid over it. A week later, I take the Band-Aid off. Cut's still there. Car can't heal itself, right? So, on the good side, the human body can heal itself. On the bad side, you got a bad motherboard. You can't just go in there and switch it, right? You can't just say to the mechanic, hey, something's wrong with this car, fix it. So we got to figure out, okay, what's the interference between the parts, the power, and the information that's not allowing this system to heal? Okay? And just like any plant, we have to also take into account what's the environment look like, right? So what's it take for a plant to live? It takes the same things, but then it takes some outside energy. We have to have light, we have to have water, we have to have soil. So we also got to make sure that we don't have anything toxic to that plant that might cause it to not be as healthy. Because the same thing with the plant, you can't just, it's a living system, so you can't go in there and change the motherboard of a plant. You got to change what you're putting into it, what you're surrounding it with, right? And I want to kind of shift the conversation to a cause and effect. A lot of times we work with, let's say depression, let's use it as an example. If we're going to talk about depression being potentially a symptom of a different problem, that would be what we would call the effect, right? And a lot of times, if we're going to go get help for something, we're going to look at the effect and we're going to say, okay, what do I do or what can I do? What steps can I take? What things can I take or do to get rid of this effect, this cause, this symptom? Not cause, this symptom. Right? So we're trying to get rid of the depression. What can I do to get rid of this effect? And a lot of times we'll look at cause on the surface and we'll say, well, you know, what might be happening in your life? We'll look at some of those things of our surrounding environment. We'll look at the soil, the water, the sunlight as somewhat of a cause, but we never really get deeper into the actual problem, which is that communication between the power, the parts, and the information. Okay? And then also we want to break down the two components really of any health challenge. We've got a genetic component and we've got an environmental component. Okay? Now, about 5% of challenges are actually solely genetic. The rest of them are typically something called epigenetics. Have you guys heard of epigenetics before? No? Well, that's the marriage of the two, right? That's how our genetic pool exists within our environment. So Bruce Lipton is a great researcher on epigenetics. I don't actually have his name anywhere in the presentation. I'm going to talk about him a couple times. But when we look at this, we have to say, all right, well, what in our environment might be impacting how healthy our system is? And one of the biggest things is inside the gut, okay? Now, we're not going to dive too far into the gut. If you guys are interested in learning about the gut, we do actually have an entire separate workshop. But if I tried to put all that information into one workshop, you guys would be sitting here till tomorrow, and that wouldn't be really that fun. So we have a whole workshop on that. But really, for today's purposes, what we want to look at is, you know, the walls of your intestines, let's say, for example, are supposed to look like this, right? Well, sometimes we have an unhealthy digestive tract, right? And we start to get inflammation in there. And what it starts to do is it starts to open that up, right? And so through these little gaps in here, we actually have toxins and stuff leak back into the body, right? So have you guys all heard of leaky gut before? It's a pretty common thing. A lot of people have heard about it now. Now, that can come from, it can start all the way back day one. It can be from C-section delivery, which isn't necessarily wrong. It's just you don't go through the birth canal, so you don't get the bacteria for the microbiome. Okay? It could be from antibiotics, it can be drugs, it can be poor diet. But we really have like a 3-year window at the beginning of our life to build this microbiome. And if we interfere with that or interrupt that in those first 3 years of life, that's something you're going to work around to support and try to correct for the rest of your life. Now, you guys are all older than 3, so we can't change anything from before 3, right? But we can really look at it and say, well, might this be an issue? Because it can cause a hypersympathetic response, which really means an increased stress response, and it can actually lead to bigger challenges in our autoimmune system, and it can actually cause inflammation within the brain. Now, inflammation, good or bad? Always bad? It's an important part of our life, right? That's how we heal. Inflammation is absolutely essential to most systems of our body, unless it's attacking itself and then starting to attack things like our brain. So once inflammation is excessive or a hyperinflammatory response, well, then it becomes a really big issue. And to the point that they actually think the inflammation and the inflammatory process is now the real actual cause of things like depression. Inflammation within the gut, inflammation within the brain, inflammation within the system that is not allowing the nervous system, the parts of power and the information to communicate and to function optimally. Okay? So if we got to figure that out, we figure, okay, well, let's shift our mindset from thinking we got a brain chemical problem, and this might be an inflammation problem. Now we got to figure out, well, how do we address that? And what should we look at first when we're looking at true health? If we're going to start all the way over, let's look at this. So at 25 days, your brain and your spinal cord develop. Okay, first full thing to develop in the body. And then obviously it changes as we go through the 9 months. So we already knew we were going to talk about something brain related, right? It's mental health, right? And we talked about in the beginning, we're going to say, all right, well, what about what's going on within the brain that might be impacting this? And then we just talked about a slide ago, or 2 slides ago, it's actually inflammation in the brain that is causing things like depression, right? And then the other thing that happens is you guys come to a workshop like this and you're like, well, what the heck is there a chiropractor standing up here talking to me about this? Because the thought probably ran through at least one of your minds. And really it comes down to what the role of our nervous system actually is. Okay? So this number, big number, 11 trillion. We get 11 trillion bits of information per second in the body. Okay? 11 trillion. That we then have to process, coordinate, integrate, and then respond to, right? So the function of our nervous system, if you guys look up Bruce Lipton, that epigenetics medical doctor that I talked about, the function of our nervous system is to perceive our environment and then based on that perception, coordinate the behavior of all other cells. All right, so we talked about before, cause and effect. The behavior, the effect, is something that we focus on. You got a problem, you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I've got this thing, this effect or this behavior, I've got to get rid of this. And a lot of times we address that. You probably have a lot of people on your team to address that, right? A lot of times we'll have a medical doctor, we'll have a mental health professional, we'll have therapists, a lot of people on there, right? But we got to look at, if we're taking in 11 trillion bits of information per second, we have to figure out how to process that. And I mean, it's nanoseconds, right? But that information that we're bringing in through our senses, through our environment, has to be integrated, and then we have to react. So on a very basic level, you guys have been to the doctor and had your reflexes checked, right? So if we hit your knee for a reflex, how long does it take for your body to react? Yeah, nanoseconds, right? Like split second. Because we got to hit the knee, right? Well, now it's going to go to the brain 2 different ways. It's going to be a sensory nerve that goes through the spinal cord and all the way up to the brain. And it's got to come all the way back down and go to the motor neuron and tell the muscle to react. Okay? That's pretty fast. What happens if you put your hand on a hot stove? You're going to take that thing right off. Well, that information had to go from the stove, through the hand, to the brain, back down to the muscles to tell you to move that hand. In nanoseconds, right? So we have to look at this and say, all right, if we're taking in 11 trillion bits of information that aren't always necessarily a hot stove, what happens if that's interfered with? Is that going to delay the response? Is that going to change how the body responds? And not everything's an emergency, right? So there's a lot of information, a lot of senses gathered that our brain has trouble integrating, and especially if it's inflamed. Okay? Now we can divide the nervous system up into two sides. You guys have all heard of the fight or flight, the stress response, right? We're going to call that the gas pedal. Okay? That's our stress response. That's our fight or flight. And then we got our parasympathetic, which is our brake pedal. This is the calm side of the nervous system. This is rest and digest, growth and development. Okay? We should spend most of our day over here, right? And just really save this side of the nervous system, this sympathetic fight or flight, for when that tiger jumps out of the bushes and starts chasing you. You got to get from point A to point B right now. We should be primarily in the parasympathetic, rest or digest, calm side of the nervous system. And we're saving this for when that tiger jumps out. Right? Now, when that tiger jumps out, we're going to increase our heart rate because we know we have to run. We're going to increase cholesterol production because we know we're just about to get eaten and we have to make some new cells. Right? We're going to increase our blood sugar because we have to feed the muscles so they can move faster so we can get away. Well, we don't have to digest food, so our stomach and our intestines stop working as efficiently, right? Which we talked about an intestinal problem before, right? Our bladder, we don't necessarily have to think about going pee, so that's going to stop working, right? But then a lot of our other signs and symptoms are going to start to increase. Now, if those increase and we don't have movement to override that increased stress response, that's where pain goes faster to the brain. Now, if I kind of combine that with, is anybody a baseball fan? Like the World Series starts in a couple days. Anybody a baseball fan? Yeah? All right. So we're standing up there, we get hit by a pitch. That hurts. But if we move or we rub it or we do some kind of a motion, right, that actually travels on the same wave, the same nerve to the brain as pain, but movement actually overrides the pain. Okay, so we're going to talk about it a little deeper in a second, but when we have that increased sympathetic response, or we're shifted over into the stress response, and then we have lack of movement along with it, it's way more complex than that, but for very basic terms, when we have lack of movement with that, now we're stuck on the stress response side and we don't have movement. So there's a couple layers to it. Now, the way to help with any kind of chronic challenge is to really look at that balance and say, okay, well, where are we and what can we do to help restore the optimal balance of these two systems? Okay? And that can actually be measured. Okay? So how many people have heard of heart rate variability? Few people? Okay? So heart rate variability is great. Very basically, if you have 60 beats per minute, it's not 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000. It doesn't count that way. Okay? Every space in between your heartbeat varies. And the more it varies, the more that heart rate variability, right? The more variance there is in that, the more adaptable your system. Now, the more adaptable your system, the more balance you have between that sympathetic stress response, parasympathetic calm response. Okay? So this HRV, now there's heart rate variability has been in medical healthcare, in a lot of disciplines of healthcare for decades. This isn't something that's brand new, okay? But this particular way of graphing, of charting it, is something that we utilize in our office. So ultimately, this green circle right here, green box, whatever, is an optimally functioning, balanced nervous system. The black line going down the middle is our balance line between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, and then there's some heart rate information. But what this really ultimately tells us is we now have the ability to measure where you're at on that balance. Are we stuck in a stress response, like this particular person is? That white dot is the result, right? Are we stuck on this sympathetic side, or is the system balanced? We actually have the ability to measure that. Now that's super important because when we look at mental health illnesses and diagnosis and challenges, we're actually seeing it's inflammation, right? and a strong correlation with low heart rate variability. Okay, and even the medications that we just said were supposed to help actually worsen this. Now, if any of you do happen to take an SSRI, you do notice an initial benefit. And that's because an SSRI actually also reduces inflammation in the body. Okay? It doesn't.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure, an SSRI works. A lot of times you'll see an improvement because it also has an anti-inflammatory function to the medication. And like we said before, we're now seeing through research that it's an inflammatory response, right? And so the medication will help a little bit. So like I said, I'm not here to take anybody off or suggest your medication isn't helping you. I'm just saying it might be helping you for a completely different reason than you're taking it. Okay? And then ultimately, we want to know what is the heart rate variability. So we know we can measure that now. And then we got to figure out, well, how do we actually improve that? Okay? So there's a whole bunch of them here correlating anxiety, depression, mental illness with low heart rate variability scores. Now, like we said before too, a lot of this starts very, very early on, right? This can be stress in utero, this could be a stressful delivery, this could be stress in our childhood. It could have started a long, long time ago, okay? So what they see, what the correlation they see and they report on in this particular book is that early stress can cause this exaggerated responses of stress and neurochemical and behavioral challenges like depression, anxiety, and addictions. Okay, so stress certainly plays a part, but the cool thing, oh, sorry, you want to take a picture of that? Sorry. So now we have something called neuroplasticity. So is this a familiar term to anybody, neuroplasticity? Yes? Okay, what's it mean?
I haven't really figured it out. I just got a bunch of brain issues.
All right, all right. Well,
The ability of your brain to, like, I mean, like your cells regenerate every 7 years and they're all new.
yeah.
The ability of, like, cognitive, I can't think of the term for it, but the ability to basically rewire your brain.
100% is exactly what it is. Yes. So neuroplasticity is beautiful and it's amazing, and it literally tells us from the moment we're born to the moment we're gone, our brain is changing and can change and will change based on what you do. It really truly is a use it or lose it moment, right? If there's parts of your brain you're not using, it'll trim the connections to those parts of the brain, right? It'll trim those synapses. If you want to learn new things, if you decide, hey, I'm going to write left-handed instead of right-handed, you literally could train yourself to write left-handed. You're going to create new connections in your brain, okay? So the cool part about it is it can always change to the positive. It can also change based on your behavior if we're headed in the wrong direction, right? So it's super powerful in both directions. Now there's a book. This is an amazing book. I recommend listening to it in an audiobook, okay, because it's super science intense. Super amazing book. I'm gonna show you a little clip from the guy who wrote the book, but this is a great book, and it's, like I said, super intense. So it's not like something most of you are gonna sit down and read it unless you're like some super fast reader. And finish it. You're going to read a little bit about a case, and then you're probably going to read a little bit about another case. But really, they talk about how amazing the brain is and how neuroplasticity can literally, they had 70-year-old stroke patients in here that regained full function, right? They have a whole bunch of different really cool things that the power that the brain can have. All right, now I'm going to show you a little video on it.
Very recently, our best and brightest scientists and physicians believe that the adult brain could be changed. Our brain circuits were formed and finalized in childhood. Now we discover that the brain's plastic, even changeable. But not all change is good. That changing brain can actually do us harm. Obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even schizophrenia. But the mind can harness the damaged brain's plasticity to change itself. And now we are finding new treatments for mental diseases and disorders once thought incurable.
When you would tell people, hey, this is your brain sending you a false message, it would help them.
We might actually change the whole course, the whole trajectory of someone's life.
This is medicine. This has outcomes that are medical. It changes brains physically. It changes them chemically. It changes them functionally.
We do not yet see where the limits will be. They are still big new surprises.
My name is Dr. Arnold Deutsch, and I wrote a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. The discovery of neuroplasticity is the discovery that our brains can change their structure and function through mental experience alone. It signals the most important change in our understanding of the brain in 400 years, because for 400 years we thought of the brain as though it were like a machine with parts, and that view of the machine-like brain gave rise to a neurological fatalism, because it meant people who were born with brain damage or who sustained brain damage as they developed were condemned to live with it, because machines do many glorious things, but they don't grow new parts, and they can't reorganize themselves.
So basically said everything that I could have just played that at the beginning. I just saved you guys half an hour. Just kidding. So just like he said, a car, if I cut the car, it's not going to heal itself, right? The computer can't reorganize itself. But our brain, it can, and good and bad direction. So now we got to figure out, okay, now we know there's this neuroplasticity. Now we know a few more things about what's going on. Now we got to figure out who we got to have on our team, right? So like I said, most of you guys are going to have a lot of people on your team to work on the output, right? We're going to work on the feelings we're having. We're going to work on the function of our day. We're going to work on a lot of those outputs. But we also got to figure out, what about that input side? If the function of our nervous system is to perceive the environment, take those 11 trillion bits of information every second and integrate them into a behavior, right? We got to figure out, well, where's there an imbalance? If the behavior is a challenge, what can we do about the perception side, about that input side? Okay? Now, obviously, I talked about in the beginning, I'm a chiropractor. So where we look always is as close as we can get to that brain, right? Right up here where the neck and the head meet. Now, there's a couple of important things right there. That's your spinal cord. Right above there is your brainstem. And this little red thing that goes down through the vertebra is actually an artery. Okay? That's the artery that feeds the brain, the blood. So if we have a misalignment, or what we would call a vertebral subluxation, that actually negatively impacts how our brain functions. Okay? Now, it's going to also mess with something called your autonomic nervous system. Autonomic is kind of just what it sounds like. It kind of sounds like you're saying automatic, autonomic. It's all the automatic parts of your body. You never told your lungs what to do. You haven't told your heart what to do. You don't tell your kidneys what to do. They all just kind of work, right? Unless there's some kind of interference to the parts of power and the information. And that's what the vertebral subluxation is. It can decrease blood flow to the brain. It can cause increased inflammation, which we figured out was a core problem. It can alter the CSF flow, so the cerebral spinal fluid. If you look up altered CSF flow, you're going to see things like autism and multiple sclerosis, and you're going to see a whole bunch of challenges, health challenges, chronic health challenges based on those exact things. Interference in this particular area, especially at the top, can also cause tension on the cord. Now that can lead to curvatures of the spine. It can lead to dysfunction in the spine. Okay? Each one of those nerves that go all the way out to our finger has the same exact lining that goes around our brain. It's one continuous lining. So if we have tension anywhere, it can actually impact our entire body, which is pretty incredible, pretty powerful. So yeah, obviously now I talked about subluxation, and then we said, okay, well, neuroplasticity can be good or it can be maybe not so good. Well, here it says, hey, look, a subluxated system that has spinal dysfunction can actually alter the input to the nervous system, which then can alter how it processes. which can then lead to a pathological processing of the body, which can lead to some, not necessarily bad, I don't know if there's good or bad neuroplasticity, but it's going to start to make changes to the brain that aren't necessarily what you want, the changes you want to see. That make sense? But then we look at it further and we say, well, if subluxation, if misalignment, if lack of movement in the spine, like we were talking about a minute ago with movement, if we don't have movement to feed the brain, what is it really actually impacting? And it's mostly impacting our cerebellum, which is responsible for full body movement, thoughts, feelings, emotion, and healthily functioning organs and systems, okay? Especially like our immune system. So we need to have movement in the spine. Well, movement in the spine is going to be improved if you don't have those fixations in the spine, those what we will call subluxations. And here's another research article that says, okay, well, subluxation also, so it alters movement, it alters brain input, but it also shifts us into a fight or flight response. So we talked about before, we want to just be in this fight or flight side for a short period of time. We don't want to be there all day. The longer we spend over there, the less our organs and glands work, the less efficiently our body works, and it leads to other conditions, right? Like we talked about in the beginning, depression, anxiety, mental illness is often not alone by itself, right? There's a lot of other chronic health challenges that come along with it. And this is starting to tie up those loose ends and say, oh, well, what if it's coming from the brain and spine and the nervous system at its core? All these other things, we have to build a village, so all the other things you're already working with, you certainly still need those people on your team. We're not having this workshop saying, hey, look, your team sucks, you need to abandon them and abort ship. We're saying, hey, look, who's missing on that team? What is missing? Is there someone working with the movement of the spine and the input to the brain? And that can restore the autonomic balance that we just talked about, which is measured with heart rate variability, right? And we have the ability to measure that. Because low heart rate variability is correlated with these mental illnesses, right? And these diagnoses. High heart rate variability and adaptability is correlated with less chronic illness, less disease, better quality of life. Now, we also can measure the actual autonomics. We talked about autonomic sounds a lot like automatic. We can measure where that stress is actually hanging out in the body, and we do that through temperature, because when the system is under stress, it actually changes the temperature regulation along the spine on the level that's impacted, right? So we can actually find where these subluxations or where these areas of the nervous system are actually impacted, okay? And then we also see a decrease in inflammation when we remove those subluxations. If we work to restore that normal motion, right, which is going to restore that communication in the system, well, guess what? That inflammation goes down. And I know, we talked about this, inflammation is one of the now leading causes, or what they have discovered as being one of the primary causes. And specifically, we're always going to look when we start at the upper cervical spine. So CO is actually your head, and then C1 is the first vertebra of the neck, and then C2 is the second vertebra of the neck. So we're always going to look there because that's where we see the biggest impact. We'll also see that it changes a whole bunch of things. Glucose metabolism, sympathetic relaxation. So it takes us out of this stress response, moves us over here to this calm response. Okay? More recent research here too. This one's not super recent. It's 2016. That's pretty good. It shows that we have brain activity changing by 20%. There was another one just published this month that showed that there was actually improvement even at the adolescent level, kids. If we test them brain function, there's actually improved brain development and function in children under chiropractic care that have worked to remove these subluxations and this interference in the system. Okay? So we're learning a whole bunch about this thing called vertebral subluxation, but then how does this all tie together? Like what does this really actually mean to someone that's not, a chiropractor that says this subluxation S word all the time? Well, what it really comes down to is, it's going to play out here, is our ability to respond to stress. Now, this is kind of a chicken or an egg conversation, okay? if we have a subluxation, vertebral subluxation, we have a lowered ability to adapt to stress. So there's three kinds of stress in our life. There's what we do with our body, physical stress, what we put into our body and onto our body, chemical stress. And then there's who we're surrounded by, right? What's in our day-to-day, that's our mental stress. Now, when the body's processing this stress, it really doesn't differentiate what kind of stress is this. Stress just impacts us, okay? But if we have this interference in how our nervous system functions, it alters our ability to respond well to stress. And if we can't respond well to stress, it leads to this fixation, this misalignment in the spine. And it's just this circle, this spiral, right? This snowball rolling down the hill of your body just continually losing its functionality because of this neuroplasticity concept. It's not even a concept. Reality of neuroplasticity is if the wires that are the nerves that fire together wire together. So if we're constantly in a stress response, guess what? The brain's always going to try to be in. It's going to try to improve its ability to respond to stress. So it's just going to continue this stress response. And this stress response is going to come so big and so strong, and it's going to leave this little brake pedal, this little calm side of our nervous system behind, and we're going to be stuck in this imbalance until we do something to work on that and restore that balance. All right, so then we talked about maybe a little bit of when this starts, right? Early life stress. Well, a lot of research has been done on this a long time ago. So in one of my other workshops, I mean, if you guys come to my other workshop, I'm going to spoil it for a second, okay? Just if you come to another workshop, play along and don't spoil it for everybody else when you're there. But I show a video of a moonwalking bear, and nobody knows it's in there until I tell them, hey, look, there was a moonwalking bear, which is just a guy dressed up, right, moonwalking across the screen. But it's information, it helps me to connect the dots to tell you that information has been out there for a long, long time that nobody's told you. This study was done in 1987 that says, hey, out of 1,000 infants, 80% of them were found to have this vertebral misalignment, vertebral subluxation in the upper neck as an infant. But all of you knew this, right? Because this has been around for a long time. No, nobody does, because they don't share this information, right? We had this realization. It took me a long time to actually decide I was going to do this workshop. And really the driving factor, we stopped doing workshops for a couple years. Obviously, COVID was in there, but we stopped doing workshops for a couple years because I just thought, hey, people don't want to come spend their Tuesday night here sitting in this classroom. Obviously, you guys proved me wrong. But the other thing we learned about it is if I don't tell you guys this information, I don't know that you're going to hear it. And it's not like I just made this crap up 10 minutes ago. This stuff has been around 1966. Everybody has to know that, right?
So why is this not more prominent in the medical field then?
Well,
Why is this information just shoved on the side and we're all still?
I'm going to answer that question for you in just a second, okay? But we have this one where there's 1,250 infants, right, 90%. And then even if we have this perfectly magical birth, right, no interventions, no problems, the logistics of it, we all came through the birth canal, or at least we're in utero. The birth process itself is pretty stressful, right? Let's just be real. So there's stress that occurs with it, and that can cause these imbalances in especially the upper cervical spine, which then can impact the spinal cord and brainstem. And then this is another super classic, well-researched study that shows this kinematic stress syndrome, which just tells the same exact thing. Now, increasing risk factors, long labor and delivery, C-section, vacuum extraction, twins, those kinds of things, okay? And chiropractic and mental health, I'm going to get to your answer now here in 1 second. Chiropractic and mental health has been something that has been around for a long, long time. Anybody, is everybody from the Quad Cities? So you guys know Palmer College is here. So there's this nice young man many years ago named B.J. Palmer. His dad was the actual founder of chiropractic, and then came the son, right? B.J. said, hey, look, I think we can actually make quite a change in healthcare, in mental health specifically. And so they had these 4 sanitariums or mental health hospitals where all you got was chiropractic care, rest, exercise. Pretty cool, huh? Oh, the AMA didn't like that, American Medical Association. They used to put chiropractors in jail for this. Then there was a suit, you could look it up, it says it's AMA versus Wilkes. The chiropractor had to actually sue, chiropractic had to sue the American Medical Association for a defamation lawsuit for lying, right? For saying, because they were saying we're practicing medicine without a license when we're not practicing medicine at all. We're just providing chiropractic care. So now the AMA is slightly more powerful than chiropractic, so these things have gone away. But the problem is, these sanitariums had a 65% success rate, meaning 65% of the cases were cured and released, versus 27% that just went to a regular medical mental health hospital. So, I mean, in a perfect world, I think these things should still exist because I think both are appropriate. I think having a mental health hospital based in medicine, absolutely appropriate. I think having one based in chiropractic, absolutely appropriate. Maybe someday we'll work together. That would be an amazing day, but I don't know when it's coming. But maybe someday we'll all get over our egos and say, hey, look, what if we all work together? What if we actually care that the patient got as well as they possibly can because we offer them everything? That would be pretty awesome. I don't know if I'm going to see that in my lifetime, but so the answer of that was because we got squashed like a bug.
Were they residents at those places, or was it walking? See where they were living there, like depending on how often they were out.
So if they were local people,
Play into that.
yeah, if they were local, they would come in, right? They would just come in and get their care and do what BJ told them to do and then go, right? But there were people that came from all over the United States. I don't know, I'd have to look into, I have that mental health book that was on that thing. I'd have to look and see if there was any international, but at least North America, people came from all over the place to go to these. So those people would stay, at least for a period of time before they were released. And then some people didn't spend all.
Great to a point, but there's a lot of areas or wholeness or whole wellness that would be lacking from those parts too.
Oh, 1,000%, yes.
Bring that 65% up to 99.
Right. We have to get to a point, right? We have to get to a point, and I don't want to get too soapboxy and off topic, but we have to get certainly to a point where the health of the patient comes first, not how much we can make from it, what vacation we can go on if we give this medication. Like, we have to figure out, right, how do we decorrupt the system all across the board, right? All healthcare. All right, and then this is just another study that shows the same kind of improvement. I've got a whole bunch of these, so I'm not going to read them all to you. Really, I just wanted to show you this to say, hey, look, each one of these is a different case study saying if we can address the challenge that's leading to the inflammation, the lack of movement, the interruption in power parts and information, then, and we don't already have that as a part of the team, we're most of the time going to see a pretty significant change. Okay? As we work as a team, as a village, as we build that team to add in the people that are necessary to get there. Okay? This is another one that says the same thing. Now, also there's other side benefits. We call them the silent signs or the silent benefits of optimal physiological changes, optimal physiological health through an optimally functioning nervous system and good heart rate variability. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of awesome other perks on there. And then obviously it's me standing up here talking about what I do, right? But this is a local provider that we work a lot with, so we try to build as many teams as we possibly can. And this is from our friend Molly, who said, hey, look, I've been a psychotherapist for 10 years and I frequently refer clients to chiropractic, especially when dealing with anxiety or behavior challenges, because she's found that that work that she does in her office can be accelerated with a healthy nervous system. She sees less anxiety, mitigated depression, and she feels it's a super important part of the clients that she sees because we refer to each other and she refers to other chiropractors as well. Okay? And then we get a whole bunch of, like if I work with one of you guys, let's just say for example, we get a lot of great feedback on the doctor-patient level, okay? We even send you out a little questionnaire that says, hey, how you doing? Just check in, because a lot of times people would rather send you an email than talk to you about it, which is fine. That's most of the time the case with mental health challenges. It's way easier to communicate through a keyboard. I'm okay with that. But what we most of the time find is then we also ask, hey, are you willing to share this story and help other people? Most of the time the answer is, no, I don't think so. So we don't get a ton of them to actually share, but this is my friend Dr. Steve, who actually created this whole entire workshop process that we went through to help connect with you guys. But he and his patient always asked to share this in the workshop because this particular young lady was ready to call it quits. And literally adding chiropractic to her life was the real difference for her. So I'm bringing here with the idea to, hey, look, I'm going to sign every one of you up for a lifelong care plan, chiropractic care, but more so to tell you, hey, what impact does your nervous system and inflammation and lack of movement and lack of balance in the system, low heart rate variability, what impact that might be having with yourself, your loved one, your students, your clients that you work with, okay? Whatever reason you came tonight, the goal was to give you the information to help you choose what's next on your path.